With respect to the data flow Gen 2, we imported the data and then we did the corresponding set of transformations via the UI UX route. But then imagine that in case if I want to analyze the data scope, I want to understand what set of transformations I need to do. Meaning we saw that there are different types of data transformation like remove duplicates, group by, etc. But in order for me to understand what step I need to do, I first need to do some data analytics on the existing data, meaning I have to explore the data before understanding what is the next set of steps that I need to take for the corresponding set of data transformations. So for that, there is something called as column profiling that is available within the data flow Gen 1 or Gen 2. And even it's the same set of transformations that who all are familiar with Power BI. When you open the Power BI desktop and import the data, then on that data, in case if you want to make any set of changes, it is the same aspect that it takes you within Power BI data transformations. So that also, in case if you want to analyze anything, you do the column data profiling. So for that, go under the view section. In that we had seen all other aspects except data view in detail. Correct. So for that data view, why weren't we able to see anything? Because I had not enabled the column profile. When I enable the column profile, I get different options within the column profile. What are those options? Correct. First is show column value distribution. Now, what do you mean by column value distribution here? Here I can see that I have 10 distinct values and one unique value. Correct. So what does, can someone try to and here I can see 295 distinct, 295 unique. Correct. Here I see 110 distinct value, 50 unique value. Correct. So can anyone tell me, based on your understanding of distinct and unique, what might be the difference between a distinct value and a unique value? Any thoughts?
And then distinct may be the value label, right? And the for that column, right? There might be the distinct values, but the unique is the it might be referencing the row label. If the entire row is unique or not, kind of.
No. The aspect here is, if you see, if you are stating at a row level, then how is this is part of a single row itself, correct? Here, it's a column profiling, correct? If you see for every column, I am having different set of unique values, correct? If it would have been row level uniqueness, wouldn't it have been common across all the columns? You can see, correct? Its uniqueness is different across different set of columns. And the aspect that we did is called column profiling, correct? Meaning I'm profiling at a column level. There I'm nowhere considering some row level values. So now considering this aspect that I stated, that this is column profiling. Distinct and uniqueness are at a column level. So what can it be?
Nandan, those distincts means here total number of different values. Okay. And unique means total number of values appears once.
Okay, so that is the technical terminology. So in case if I have to explain it in a layman terminology for a new joiner, what would it be? You are correct. But in case if you want to explain it to a layman person who is considering it for the first time, what would be your correct terminology that you would use?
Let's suppose, for example, Can I give example like
Sure.
suppose we have some we can take up example of like product and so unique will be like uh, suppose we have four product that is the ABCD, okay, and distinct would be so that would be like unique, okay, ABCD, and suppose we have EFGH and E is repeated,
So
okay.
you are mixing two aspects, correct here, in the terminology that you are explaining. Your original definition was correct,
Uh-huh.
but then let's take a look with respect to the examples that are present here itself, correct? Here, 10 distinct values means when I click on here, whatever values I see here, correct? Yellow, white, silver, red, black, blue, etc. These are the distinct values that are present here within this aspect. Meaning that 10 distinct values that are present within this column.
But it
Black,
is repeated,
red,
right?
sorry,
It is repeated. Like black
I'll come
will
to
not
that.
be.
I'll come to that. Hold on. So distinct value means what are the distinct set of values that are present within the corresponding column. So in this case, black, red, white, blue, multi, etc. and silver. These are the unique values. Sorry, distinct, my fault. These are the distinct set of values that are present within this column. Now, what does unique mean? Unique means is that value has not been repeated within
Oh,
that column in multiple rows. Unique means that distinct means these are the different values that are present within the column.
yes.
Unique means there is only once that corresponding value has come in, meaning in all the rows, that value has come only once. It has not duplicated within the corresponding column. That is what we call as uniqueness. So if you see product ID, correct? Product ID and product name are the primary key of the product table, correct? Hence, if you see, there are 295 distinct values across both and 295 unique values because a product ID cannot be duplicated. Hence, the distinct value matches the unique value, whereas the color can be repeated. Correct. Hence, the unique values, the distinct values are 10, but the unique value is only, meaning there is only one value that has not been duplicated. Best example is if you take a look here. If you take a look here, 1059.31, these all are duplicated, but distinct, it's 10591, 113.09, 3.40. Correct. So these are the distinct values, but since these have been duplicated, they are not considered under unique. Imagine that there would have been only one row containing the value 3.40. That is what we call as the unique value. Now, is the concept clear between what is a distinct value and what is a unique value? So distinct value is the distinct values that are present within the corresponding column. And unique value is single row for that distinct value and not duplicated. Now, show column profiles in details pane. What does this mean here? Details pane. Meaning when I had disabled this property, correct? When I click, I do not get any aspects, correct? Details pane meaning I get a detailed column profile distributions with respect to that current column. What does this mean? If you see, these are the different values that are present here. Black 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Correct? 9 are the values, but here it is showing me 10 distinct values. Can anyone guess why the values are 9 and here I'm able to see 10 distinct values? The answer is in front of you all.
Blank value or null value.
Perfect. So there are 10 distinct values, but in the value distribution, I am actually checking the values. Correct? Because here anyhow, I am getting in column statistic null count values. Correct? So there are 50 rows that have null value for the color. Total number of rows is 295. Distinct count is 10. Unique count is 1. Minimum and maximum value. Correct. Now, since this is a string column, minimum and maximum value are based on ascending and descending order of the string. But imagine if there have been some integer values and you wanted to identify the minimum and maximum range of the same, then the column statistics provides you that. Error count. I'll come to that. Correct. So now, if you see, I want to check the column value distributions. Correct. 89 out of 295 rows are black values. Meaning 13% of the overall products are red. So this provides me an overall understanding of the values. I can also check by the length as well. Text length, meaning the column values, length of the values based on the color. Red is 3, blue is 4 digit, etc. So I can change it by the value or the text length. So this provides me a better understanding of managing and doing the data transformations for my data. Then comes the show column quality details. Now, of course, the detailed aspect does provide that. But here also I can take a look with respect to what the corresponding set of values is. Correct? Meaning, I can see that out in this column, there are 17%, 50 rows that are blank or empty, which includes 70% of my overall values. Valid meaning they have proper values. Error. Now, imagine that I did some data transformations wherein I added some custom column. Correct? Now, in that custom column, imagine that I added certain aspect like some expression. And imagine if that expression is wrong. Correct? Let's say I added a custom expression product. Okay. Now I am in my trial capacity. Correct. So let me try adding a language prompt. Correct. Create a column with error message if the color of the product is red. Now, do you all think this would create a column? No. Why? Because of my trial capacity. To leverage Copilot, one has to use a dedicated fabric capacity. Correct? Any queries up till now? Yes or no?
No.
No.
Okay. So now imagine that if I want my value to be, okay, now I am creating a derived column. Correct? Let me create a derived column of type text. Correct? And let me insert that column. So now if you all see, I am able to see the custom column that got created, and then it is creating the necessary column distributions or the column profiling for the same. Is the same aspect that it would duplicate, correct? Now imagine that if I want to update the logic, correct? If I want to use if the color equal to red, then one else color. Okay. So now also it is providing me the necessary values, because up till now I have not thrown any error, correct? We are just creating the corresponding aspect. Then error now if you all see, what I've done is, this is an explicit error that I have thrown here. But imagine that in certain cases, certain expressions that you created, correct? Like imagine if x greater than 10, then take a substring of that value. But if that value itself does not meet the criteria of the string length, then there would be an error, correct? So in such cases, if I want to identify if there is any error with respect to the logic that I have created, so for that, you can see the corresponding aspect in the data view column quality details, because this provides me the column quality. I can see that there are 12% error. So now if I take a look here, there are 38 rows that contain error. Since there are error, it is not able to create the proper column distribution, because should the error row be skipped out or uh, be considered in the distribution? That's what it won't understand. Hence, then I have to take a look with respect to what I'm trying to do. So here in the error message, if I see, it is taking me to the corresponding error message. It's an expression error, meaning I have explicitly created an error within the expression, and it provides me the corresponding aspect. Now, since it does contain the error aspect, what I can do is I can filter out the error rows by removing the erroneous rows. So now the corresponding column distribution is back. But is that the correct approach? No, correct, because it depends. In certain cases, we do have a fault tolerance that I want to set at an organization level, wherein I do not care with respect to those erroneous rows. But in certain cases, it is a bug that has been left by the developers. So at that time, I can analyze the corresponding erroneous rows and fix my corresponding expression that has been created. So this is with respect to the column data profiling. Any queries with respect to the data flow Gen 2? And this column profiling is not specific to data flow Gen 1, Gen 2. It is also within the Power BI desktop. When you do certain set of transformations, you can leverage the same functionality. The look of UI is the same across Power BI desktop data transformation as well as the data flow Gen 1 and Gen 2. Any queries on the concept of data flows? Now, we discussed something with respect to in the source, we have different types of databases or storage layers, correct? One is a lake house, another is fabric warehouse. Then we have fabric SQL database. And I also said that there's a event streaming database or the KQL database for event related data. And then there is a new one that is coming in called Cosmos DB equivalent, the NoSQL database in the fabric ecosystem. So there are multiple storage layers that are present within Microsoft Fabric. With respect to transformation aspect, we have multiple tools. One is data pipeline for orchestration. Then we have data flow Gen 2 for data transformations. And we have notebooks that we had seen briefly in the last session with respect to what all we can do code level transformations within the same. We'll take a look in details with respect to notebooks in subsequent time. But notebook is your way of doing data transformation in a customized way, having your own customized logic. Whereas data flow Gen 2 is a UI UX Power Query driven route for doing your data transformations. Whereas data pipeline is an orchestration tool to orchestrate your data flow in a specific moment itself. So now, how do we design our data architecture? What all points do we need to consider while defining our data architectural aspects? With so many options, how should I proceed with that? How should I design my data flow ingestion, layers, etc.? So that's a common question across architectural aspects that one has to think across. So there is a concept called medallion architecture, or it depends. Ideally, it's called medallion architecture. Some say medallion architecture, etc. But usually it is what we term as medallion architecture. What is this medallion architecture about? In your medallion architecture, you bifurcate your data process into 3 layers. You have something called as bronze layer. Hence, some of them also, then you have something called as a silver layer. And then you have something called as a gold layer. Hence, some of them also called as a medallion architecture because these are termed on the basis of metals. So what does this mean? See, in any architectural flow, you have the concept of ETL or ELT that we had discussed, wherein you extract the data from different sources. Then depending upon your transformation engine, you either transform the data whilst the flow and then load it into the destination, or you load it into the destination and then do the necessary set of transformations. So on that aspect, the first step, that is wherein you all are extracting the data from different sources. Once you extract the data from different sources, you load it as if to preserve the source data in its original format. Because imagine that if you, rather than preserving the source data in the original format, let's say you do all the transformations and you do not have the original data, the source data. And imagine if the business comes with you stating that this is not what is expected, this is what is expected. So for me to identify whether this is a source data issue or this is an issue because of what I have developed, I do not have any means. Hence, it's ideally a good practice to preserve your source data in its original format itself. That is what we call as raw data format. Meaning you extract the data as is and load it in some location. You do not do any transformations, you do not do any massaging or data managing. You are extracting the data in its original format and loading it. That is what we call as raw data aspect. So preserving your data as is, meaning it's still raw. We are yet to make utilization of it. That is what is called as the bronze layer. Preserving your data in the raw format. Now, your data, your raw data can be of multiple types that we had discussed, correct? The three types. It can be a structured data, semi-structured data, or unstructured data. Now imagine that if your data is coming in the file aspects, correct? And it contains this set of data like semi-structured, structured, and semi-structured, structured, and unstructured. Then where should I load this data into? Which storage layer would be the best to manage all three of this data within Fabric ecosystem?
Data lake.
What is the actual terminology in the Fabric ecosystem
Lake
that
house.
defines
Lake
perfect
house.
Lake
Fabric?
house. Fabric lake
Correct.
houses.
Correct.
Yes, lake house.
So in this case, it makes sense for me to load the data into the lakehouse. Correct. Now comes the silver layer, wherein in silver layer, imagine that similar to how we saw in the data flow gen to the column data profiling, correct? Let's say there are multiple blank values, blank rows, etc. And I want to clean it up. Correct. I want to clean the data, do proper data validations, and have the necessary rows only preserved. That is what we call as silver layer. Silver layer is basically the layer wherein you do your data cleansing and data validations and transformations. Data cleansing, validations, and transformations. So imagine that I want only rows that contain proper values. So that's what I load from my raw data into my silver layer. Or let's say I have unstructured data in the form of images. Correct. I can leverage my image processing system and try to extract certain data from it. Correct. Let's say that a vehicle bypassed the traffic. So the IoT captured the image and then sent the image. Now I need to capture the corresponding license plate. So that data extraction or transformation is also your silver layer aspect. Or semi-structured data. I have my JSON file. I want to flatten the JSON files. Correct? Data cleansing, validation, and transformation. That's what I'll do in the silver layer. So in silver layer, it's basically with respect to data cleansing, transformation, and validations. So now the question comes is, imagine that let's say that I did all the data cleansing, transformations, and validations. Now I need to store the data somewhere. Where would I store this? Or where should I store this? Any thoughts?
Sorry, Nandan. This can be inserted into warehouse, but lake has both.
So you said it can be loaded in warehouse and
And lake
lakehouse.
house. Yeah,
Correct.
both can. Yes.
Why not Fabric SQL database? Why only warehouse and lakehouse?
It can be.
It can be in the
But
SQL database as well, you are stating. Okay.
but warehouse performance-wise, warehouse and lakehouse would be fine. It SQL database might have like some performance issues.
Who stated that?
I am Ramesh.
No, no, no. Meaning, I know it's you. My question is, where did you get that information that SQL databases has performance issues? Every storage layer has a unique concept behind it. SQL database is for your transactional data aspect. Warehouse is for your analytical aspect. Lakehouse is your blob layer. Correct. In case if there would have been performance issues, do you think anyone would go every aspect? Correct. So, do you all agree with what, or someone feels that no, it should only be in the warehouse that one has to load the data into? Or
No,
it
no,
can
no.
be any of these three, or it can be only one of two of this.
Warehouse and SQL.
Warehouse and lakehouse, it can be, but SQL databases, I'm not sure for like production level or not.
Some said it should be warehouse and database itself. Correct. And that's
Yes.
where the concept of medallion architecture comes in. Medallion architecture is not a one fixed architecture. Correct. You all forgot to ask the question as to what is my end goal? The gold layer is what you call as your end goal layer. It contains the data that you need for your end goal purpose. Is your end goal reporting and analytics? Correct? If it is reporting and analytics, or do you want this data to be consumed for some reusability? Correct? For future use cases. So depending upon your end goal, you decide what your silver layer has to be. Imagine that. Okay, before we come here, gold layer. So as I said, gold layer is also basically your transformed layer of the source, but your data is in the format that is needed for the downstream use case. So let's take an example, correct? Based on the data that we had. I had the product table, product model table, customer table. These are these three separate tables that we had seen in the sample data. Now in that, imagine that some of the customers added something in the Amazon, but their transaction failed, and then they did not think of buying it again. So that was a row that I do not need for my analytics. I want to calculate the overall revenue generated by the customers. Correct. So in this case, if the transaction failed for the corresponding customer, is that a row that I need? No. Correct. So I extracted the raw data as is in my bronze layer, let's say in the lake house. And remember, this is also a question mark. Meaning, it does not necessarily mean that you always have to load the data in the lake house. We'll come to that aspect as well in a couple of minutes. Correct. Since we had structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data, at that time lakehouse is the only one that can manage all three sets. But imagine if your data would have been in a structured format itself. Correct. Then is there a need for me to leverage lakehouse only? Can't I have only one solution for end to end? So everything depends upon how you want to, what is your end goal? How do you want to manage your data governance and other aspects? And we'll come to that. So the customer data, the product data, etc., extracted it as is and loaded it into the lakehouse file section. correct? But then I saw that under customers, there are some transactions that have been failed. So in the silver layer, I'll physically load those three entities, that is product, product model, product category, and customer as tables. But there I'll do the cleansing and transformations, correct? Wherein in the customer table, I do have some erroneous rows. When I say erroneous, meaning wrong transactions, which is not useful for me. So I'll skip those rows, correct? In case of data, product, we saw that there were some products with color as blank, correct? So rather than blank, I want to rename it as no color, correct? So such type of cleansings, validations, transformations I'll do, and I'll load it. Now where to load it? Now imagine that if I want to make use of a if you remember the difference between warehouse and SQL database, correct? Warehouse has limitations with respect to the SQL capabilities that one can do. Whereas SQL database is like an Azure SQL database itself. It supports all the necessary keywords. Or in case if you want to do cross data analysis and write back into something, then warehouse would be your source, because via SQL write back, it is only supported in the Fabric warehouse. Whereas Lakehouse SQL Analytics endpoints only support read-only aspect. Correct? So then, depending upon your skill set, what type of transformations do you want to use and which tool do you want to use, one would decide the necessary destination aspect. So in my case, I want to do data transformations for analytical purposes rather than transactional purposes. So I'll prefer warehouse in this case. But depending upon your use case, you can either use a warehouse or a lakehouse or a Fabric SQL database as well. So that was the set of transformations that I did and loaded it into the silver layer. Now, imagine that I want, rather than multiple tables, I want a single view of data for my analytical purposes. And that view is, I want how much amount of revenue has generated based on color category of the products. So I have a customer table, I have a product table, and I have a product model table. In the product model table, I have the product to product color. In product table, I have the product ID, names, and the corresponding aspects. In the customer table, I have customer, the product, the revenue that is generated. So in this case, I have to do some joins or merge these three tables to group by the color and the overall revenue value, which would be used for end aspect. That is what we call as the gold layer. Gold layer is basically the final layer of output on which you would do your analytics or reporting without having the need to do any additional set of data transformations. So now imagine that if I have a table with the value color and then revenue and then date, meaning on which date those got generated. Isn't this the data that I needed? Do I need to do any more transformations? No, correct. So that is your gold layer. The data that can be shared across your entire organization, or that represents your enterprise data with fixed set of logics to avoid logic duplications. So in that case, your gold layer can be preserved in a Fabric warehouse itself, a lakehouse itself, or even a SQL database as well. Or you can load it within the semantic model. If you remember, For every object that we create, a corresponding semantic model gets created, correct? But that semantic model is a default semantic model that contains all the entities. I can create a new semantic model as well, corresponding to the corresponding fabric warehouse. There I can select this only one entity that can be used by other organizations or other users within the organization. So the concept of bronze, silver, and gold is raw is your raw data as is. Silver layer is wherein you do a basic set of data transformation and merging for better data cleansing and better data reusability in future. And gold layer is your final logic, enterprise logic that would be consumed directly for analytics or any downstream use cases. So now, considering the process of bronze, silver, and gold, now in case if you want to understand, we have to explain two different aspects, correct? First is where to preserve the data. So now let's start with the raw layer. In case if you have the need of preserving structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data, then it's a clear case to select a lakehouse. But imagine if you have a structured data or a semi-structured data only, let's say structured data only, then you can directly load the data into a structured source, correct? It can be a Fabric SQL warehouse or it can be a Fabric SQL database as well. So within the corresponding warehouses or the SQL databases, you can create schemas. If you remember, schemas is logical aggregation of tables within the corresponding databases, correct? So I can create a schema called raw. Then from the raw schema tables, I load the transform data into the silver layer. So I can create a schema called silver layer and load the tables within that. And then I can create a schema called gold layer and load the logic into the gold layer. So rather than using different offerings, I can have one common offering, that is a Fabric warehouse or a Fabric SQL database, or in some case, even the lakehouse as well. If you remember in the lakehouse table section also, you have the property of schema, correct? So there you can create different schemas called raw schema, silver schema, and the gold schema. But then the question comes, what to select when? Correct. If all the offerings can be used at all the layers, then which one to select? One thing that we need to remember is, up till now we just discussed the storage layer. Correct. Remember one thing, if it is a mix of all three, then it's definitely a lakehouse only. Correct. What I said is, in case if your source data in most of the use cases is structured data, then what should be my storage layer? And in all three layers, we can use all storage layers. Like I can use a lakehouse end to end in my bronze to silver to gold. I can even use a warehouse or a SQL database. Correct. So if that is the case, then when to use which storage? So for that, we are yet to discuss. Up till now, we just discussed the process and the storage layer. But what about the data transformations? I do need to do the data transformations, correct? But to do the data transformations, I need to use certain aspects. I need to use some transformation tools. So for that, imagine that I want, but to use the transformation tools, we have three transformation tools, correct? One is the data pipeline. Now the data pipeline though might not be a direct transformation tool, but if you remember, there was something called as lookup activity, script activity, or stored procedure activity. Now, what are those? Those are the ways to trigger some SQL logics or SQL transformation aspect. So imagine that if you have your data in the warehouse, I can do the transformations within the warehouse leveraging the stored procedure logics within the warehouse. Correct? So for me to trigger the stored procedure, I can leverage the data pipeline. So here multiple times I'm using the concept called SQL. So depending upon your team's strength, meaning the developer team strength, an architecture has to decide which tool, data transformation tool, one has to select. Imagine that if most of the team are familiar with SQL, I have a strong SQL background, then I can do most of my transformations within the SQL itself. So what I can do is I can write stored procedures. Now where can I write stored procedures? To write back the data, I can use a Fabric warehouse or a SQL database. Lakehouse does not support me to write back via SQL Analytics endpoint. So that's where my Lakehouse option goes there itself. Then the debate would be within Fabric warehouse and a SQL database. But within Fabric warehouse and SQL database, there are some SQL limitations in the Fabric warehouse. So depending upon what type of SQL keywords you need to use, you make a choice between Fabric warehouse and the Fabric SQL database. But imagine that if your team's strength is Power Query. In case of Power Query, you can do the data transformations via data flow gen 2. Correct. So in data flow gen 2, then there is no limitations or restrictions. You can use any of the one, correct? Because data flow gen 2 supports either of them as a source or either of them as a destination. But in case if your team strength is more on coding aspect rather than UI UX driven route, then you would use Notebook as your transformation tool, be it across Medallion architecture or the gold layer the silver layer as well as the gold layer as well. So at that time, the Notebook would be the one that you all would be using to do the necessary set of transformations. Now Notebook does support Lakehouse mounting, Fabric warehouse mounting, but does not support SQL database mounting, etc. But you can connect to a SQL database by coding. So depending upon your scenario, skill strength, Notebook supports all three as your source and destination. But when to use a Notebook? When your team's strength is coding aspect. Now, for the gold layer, if it's only for Power BI purpose, then you can directly use semantic model as your source for your Power BI. Correct. And then it would automatically help me get that data. Or you can also load that data into a lakehouse to use a concept called direct lake mode for better performance in the Power BI. Correct. Or imagine that if you want it for some operational purposes, you can load it into the Fabric SQL database and aggregated way. So depending upon your team's strength, the developer team strength, one decides the right transformation tool, and depending upon the transformation tool, one can make a concept within which storage layer to use. So using the transformation tool was pretty simple based on the developer team strength. But selecting the storage layer is not that simple. It depends on multiple factors. Like first is different types of data. Second is transformation tool is. Third is what is the end goal. If the end goal is to use it for some machine learning use case, semantic model won't be of any significance there. Correct. At that time, I need the data in some aspect. But if your end team, if the end user wants to analyze the data based on SQL aspect rather than Power BI, then you need to have it in a SQL way wherein the team can make some data updates, etc. So at that time, you can use warehouse or SQL database, not the lakehouse. And final aspect is with respect to the data governance. Correct. In case if you'll remember, I had my structured data as the raw, and I'm loading that same data again in the silver layer. I'm duplicating my data. If my raw raw is a schema within Fabric warehouse and silver is a schema within the Fabric warehouse, and there is no transformations that I need to do. So my raw tables and silver tables, the data are getting duplicated in that case. So I do not have that much of flexibility. Or with respect to data governance, imagine that, let's take a use case, correct? Let's take a use case with respect to, give me 1 minute. Let's take a use case with respect to the data governance aspect, correct? Wherein I have a use case. Wherein I am extracting some data, some raw data. There are two developer teams. One is raw data extraction team. Another is data transformation team. Now, imagine that I have a lake house. Within that lake house, I have two files as of now. One file is, let's say, simple, which contains normal product details. I have three files. Another file is wherein I have customer details. When I say customer details, it means customers' email ID, phone number, etc., which is very confidential data. Okay? This is a PII data. It has details of the customers. And then I have customer transactions. Now imagine that if I have a single lakehouse as my entire raw zone. Now, this lakehouse might be present in, let's say, workspace 1. Now, whoever has contributor or above access in this workspace would have the access to see all the data that is present in the raw zone, because dynamic data masking won't be applicable. It is only applicable for viewer role that we had seen in the lakehouse aspect, correct? But I want my developers need not see this data because this data is very confidential. It should be only visible for some folks. So at that time, what I need to do is, rather than this data being present in the single warehouse, single lakehouse, I need to create another workspace, workspace 2, and create another lakehouse and move this table from this workspace lakehouse to this, and restrict the access in workspace 2 to only specific set of developers who need this data for advanced analytics, whereas this data is needed by most. So your raw layer development also needs to be very precise with respect to the data governance and security aspect. And same would go with respect to your silver layer. Not everyone would have the need to look at all the data, etc. So your workspace access and your entity access, which we will eventually discuss in subsequent aspect, needs to be thought across while designing your raw or the bronze, silver or your data transformed, gold or your final data aspect. So this is medallion or medallion architecture, and it depends on multiple cases, right from what is the team strength, what is the end goal of your data project, how critical is data duplication and data security for your project, and depending on these set of factors, that one creates and decides the best possible storage layer and transformation tool to be leveraged within your end-to-end data processing. So any queries on the concept of medallion architecture?
So Nandan, just had a simple queries, okay? So suppose end user has some both requirement, like analyzing data, okay, and also reporting the data into Power BI. So in that case, can we go for warehouse or SQL database
Uh,
for
uh,
gold layer?
So for gold layer, you can go with the Fabric warehouse. Since your Fabric
Okay.
warehouse is your analytical database, SQL
Yes.
database is basically your operational database or a transactional database. Correct. If you want to load your data, see, there are operational teams as well that need operational logs. Correct. So for that, your gold layer would be Fabric SQL database. But if your analytical aspect is for data, which heavy amount of data, then Fabric warehouse would be your source, since that can act as a source for your Power BI report, as well as the users who want to do analytics via SQL can leverage it. Clear?
Yeah. Yeah.
So everything depends on these different set of criterias while deciding the corresponding medallion architecture. So any queries? If no, then Krishna, can you share your screen?
Yes, Nandan. Wait, give me a minute.
Sure. Okay. So now let's discuss the case study. Now, in the case study aspect, the first aspect was create a fabric, create a workspace and a lake house. That was a pretty simple ask, correct? Then came in upload one files in the lakehouse file section with the corresponding set of details. That is employee name, employee ID, gender, mobile number and salary. Now, this was a normal data creation aspect, correct? Then comes create another workspace and a lakehouse, wherein I asked you all to upload another file in the lakehouse that contains your employee ID, company name and city. And the city values were a pickup list that that I had asked you all to create across.
So here in above one, data we store as just sample data, na?
Sorry.
Correct.
Sample data. I
Correct.
had
Sample data.
like yeah.
Correct. You
Yeah.
had to create your own sample data.
Okay.
Scroll down.
That I had.
Now load both these files as tables in the lakehouse mode, meaning we had uploaded it into the file section, correct? So from file section, if you click on the three ellipses of the files, you can load it into tables. But for that, only two types of files can be supported, correct? Either it is a delimited file or a Parquet file. And you cannot create a Parquet file locally. You have to write some code or some other leverage another tool, correct? So indirectly, I was asking you all to upload a CSV file into the lakehouse file section and then load it as a table within the lakehouse corresponding table section. Correct?
Yes.
Then came the aspect as create an output in the SQL Analytics endpoint, wherein I wanted the count, the gender, and the company. Can you scroll up? If you see, the company name is present in the employee job type table, whereas the gender is present in the employee details table. So basically my ask was that you do a join between those two tables. Now, for me to join those two tables, one aspect is I can physically, since this data is present across two different lake houses, One way is I can physically replicate that data from that lake house into another lake house. But there we would be duplicating our data and efforts. Rather than that, the answer was to create a shortcut. Scroll down. So create a shortcut from lakehouse 2 to lakehouse 1 or vice versa. Correct? You could have selected any of the lakehouse as your querying point. So wherever you are querying or wherever you are creating a view, from there you need to create a shortcut to the another workspace lakehouse. So here it was expected that you create a shortcut to the other lakehouse and then create a view, wherein in view you would have written select count, comma, gender, comma, company name as company, because the column name is company name. Correct. But I wanted it as company. As company, meaning you are providing an alias for your column name from lakehouse employee table, left join with, since you are using shortcut here, you can directly reference that shortcut table name. Left join with employee details table on employee ID, group by gender, comma, company name. That was what I was expecting you all to create a view, or you could have also written a normal select query. But since for reusability purpose, in case if other users want to leverage that corresponding data, then it makes sense to create a view so that even other users can leverage that output. Then comes give access to user to be able to query the employee detail table, but with salary as a 0. Correct. So there could have been two options. One is you can create a view with 0 as salary. Correct. Select all columns except salary column from employee table and write 0 as salary. But that's a hard coding way of providing the data. Correct. That does not make sense. Imagine that even if an admin wants to see the underlying data, proper data, that admin also would see the data as 0 because you hard code it as 0. Hence, the solution to this was to leverage dynamic data masking. So imagine that if you use dynamic data masking on your employee detail table by using the default masking on the salary column, that since salary column is a numerical column, so the default value for a numerical is 0. So the expectation was the user would be granted read-only access at the lakehouse. In that way, the dynamic data masking would be enabled, and for those users, the salary value would be visible as 0. Any queries up till now?
So default will not be used, right?
Sorry?
Default we use marks the data, right? So that should we cannot use, right?
I'm not understanding your question.
Salary column for salary column, masking
Correct.
salary column, right? So there we can use default, right? Function
That's
default.
what I said. You would use the default data masking functionality because it's a numerical column, and I stated that explicitly the value has to be 0. If I would have wanted some random values, I would have used random data masking. My use case was every row, every salary value should be 0. Hence, you would use the default dynamic data masking that is being shown here. Clear?
Yes, yes.
Now let's go back to the case study. The next scenario was create a sample fabric warehouse. When I say sample fabric warehouse, Microsoft provides with a sample fabric warehouse. You have to type sample fabric warehouse. Now create a view to show the count of employees by country in warehouse. Correct. Now the warehouse contains a country table and employee contains the country code. So basically my ask was that you cross query the lake house within the fabric warehouse and create a view within the fabric warehouse. Basically this functionality states that as long as your lake house and fabric warehouse are within the same workspace, you can cross query the data from fabric warehouse into the you can cross query the data from within the fabric warehouse and query the lakehouse data. Then the next aspect was allow a user to read the geography table with zip code as masked. So here also it was a case of dynamic data masking only. Scroll down, and then the case was, and for one of the user, ensure that he is only able to query Clarinda city data. So this is a case of having row level security implemented. So for row level security, we are yet to take a look with respect to Fabric Warehouse row level security. So in case if you are able to implement it yourself, well and good. But if not, then anyhow, we would be taking a look with respect to the row level security eventually once we complete all the security related aspects within the Fabric ecosystem, entity level security rather than workspace level security.
So for that, Nandan, I had used I created a views, okay, where selected only city equal to Clarida, and then I
Correct.
tried denied
Correct. So
select
that is one way
statement.
wherein you create a view, but imagine that that is not a optimized way. You are
Yeah.
getting your output, correct? But here if you see, and for one of the user, correct? So imagine in future, if another user comes in, correct, and
Mm.
he says that I want to see data for only USA. So would you create different views pertaining to different regions, geos? No, correct?
Uh,
Because if you start creating different views, correct,
mm.
the maintenance effort would increase significantly. So for that, it's better to create a common function which would work as a row level security, which would be common for everyone. That we will take a look eventually in the bootcamp. So any queries? So creating a view though provided you the output, that is not the good way or
Pretty good.
optimized way.
Yes, yes.
Clear?
Yes.
Now scroll down to the data pipeline use case. So in the data pipeline use case, the scenario was create a parameter with the name input string of type string with the value. Then create a variable with the name varx of type string. So we had to create a parameter and a variable of type string. Now the requirement is iterate via for each activity number of times the values are within the input string split by delimiter. Meaning in the above case, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different values between delimiters, correct? A, B, C, D, E, F, X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6. So my for each activity should iterate 5 times. And within the variable X, I want to assign the iteration count. Meaning, if this is the first iteration, the value should be first. If it is second iteration, the value should be second. I do not want what value it is of the iteration. That would have been pretty easy, correct? Item. If I would have used the item expression, it would have given me A, B, C, D, E, F, X, Y, Z in the corresponding iteration. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the corresponding iteration number. And then I am stating that for every iteration, wait for the iteration number second. Meaning if it is first iteration, wait for 1 second. If it is second iteration, wait for second. There is a issue in the print. So rather than second, it should have been first iteration, wait for 1 second. Second iteration, wait for 2 seconds. And in case if the iteration is third iteration, it's a specific case, then skip the wait activity. Do not wait for any time. Correct. And then there was some additional use case as well. I guess that has not been copied. There was a scenario wherein in case if there is any failure, throw the error message, send a notification, or throw an error, send a notification for that corresponding error message. Correct.
Yes, yes,
That seems
yes.
to be
Email.
missing from this case
I
study.
think, yeah. Mhm.
Okay. So now go to the ADF pipeline. Or the data pipeline. So first step is scroll down, meaning expand the parameter section. Create an input string. Correct. With delimiters. You should have used that input string itself, but no worries. Anyhow, we had to test out the scenario. Correct. So here, rather than using semicolon as the separator, comma has been used as the separator. Go to the variable sections. Now, even though I stated you create only one variable called varx, I had stated to create a variable of type string, not integer. Correct?
Mhm.
So you should have ideally created a new variable for other aspects. But in this case, let's proceed considering that the variable x should have been of type integer. But ideally the requirement was to create of type string. Clear? So whenever
Yeah.
you go across these scenarios, be very clear with respect to the data types. In most of the cases, those who had submitted, I saw there was a misalignment with respect to the data types. The user has specifically stated, correct, you all need to have that of data type string. Be very careful on those creations. But for now, let's consider that it should have been of type integer only. But I had stated to create only one variable. Then why was there a need to create another variable increment? Because of the requirement. I want to calculate the count of the iteration, correct? Whether it is a first increment, second increment. So I need to check which iteration it is. So for that, you have to define a default value. So I had to create a new variable, ideally in the earlier case, but since now assume that we have already selected it as type string or integer, I have to start with a default value 0. Because up till now there have been no iterations, correct? But you cannot self-reference a variable within the expressions. Meaning, I want to calculate, this is the first iteration. So I have to do variable x equal to variable x plus 1. But since I cannot self-reference a variable, first I have to create a new variable. I have to assign that variable the current value of my iteration, then override the varx value or the value with increment plus 1,
+1, yeah.
and then reassign in that var increment value with varx for the next iteration. So for that, you need an intermittent variable to preserve that values. So that was the concept that I was expecting you all to do. So now let's go across with the case study. Click on the for each iteration. Since first aspect was I want to iterate it over the times with respect to the delimiter. Click on the settings.
What happened? I don't know.
Okay. basically the expression here is wrong. Correct. It should have been earlier. It was when I had reviewed it, it was correct. So it is basically you will have to use split functionality. So write split, edit it. Correct. Use split, delete the entire expression here. At the rate. Every expression should start with at the rate. At the rate split, bracket. First, what do I want to split? The input string parameter. Click on the parameter below.
This one.
Connect.
Oh,
Comma.
from here, comma, right, Nandan?
Connect. Comma. Comma, not semicolon.
Oh, sorry.
Quote, single quote. And then the delimiter was comma in your case. Correct? So comma.
Yeah.
Okay. So what this would do is it would split the string into an array. And for each iteration, I need it as an array itself. Correct. Now, the sequential property needs to be enabled because as I said, correct, I want the iteration value and wait it for that subsequent iteration. So in case if I do it parallelly, the variables would be overridden. I won't understand. So in this scenario, sequential was the need of the hour. Now go within the for each activity. The pencil symbol, click on the edit symbol within the activities. Within the for each, there. First is set the correct aspect. Click on the set variable, settings. Here, we are overriding the var increment value with the var x value. So now here I am setting the value as 0 for var increment in the first iteration. In the correct, because the default value had been set as 0. Once that has been set, then under set variable activity, the second set variable activity, go there. Under settings, I have to increment the value because this is the first iteration, correct? So 0 plus 1. So it is the first value. And then imagine in the second iteration, the previous set variable activity, which was earlier 0, the var increment value was 0, would now get initialized with 1. So next iteration is 1 plus 1, 2. So now there was a condition, that is, in case if the iteration, click on the if, not edit, click on the if, go back. There was a condition that in case if the iteration is 3, skip the wait activity, but other than that, proceed with waiting for that corresponding time. Correct. So for that, if you see, if the variable var x is not equal to 3, then wait for some time. Else, ignore. Hence, in the false section, there is no activity created. But within true activity, there is a wait activity created, which is expected. So now let's go within true activity. Within that, the requirement was to wait for the iteration count of seconds. And var x contains the iteration count. Hence, the wait time I was expecting to be parameterized. Now, the final requirement was, now go back to the main canvas. To send an email notification with the error message in case if anything fails. So for that, on failure, the corresponding email notification activity was created. Now this does meet my need, but I was expecting you all to test that whenever a for each activity fails, I wanted you all to fail for some scenario and test out. Correct. Now the problem is whenever anything fails within any iteration activity, and if you do on failure of the for each activity only, the for each activity failure message would give you that something within the for each has failed. Is that the correct error message that I want to send as an email notification to my users? That something within
No,
the pipeline has failed, something within the for each has failed. Is that the right way?
no, Nandan.
So for that, you have to capture the error message of each and every activity. So does that mean that after every activity, I have a fail condition and to send an email message so that I capture the error message of that corresponding activity? That is one way of doing it. But in that, you're duplicating the number of activities. So for that, there is a better logic to do that. So can you open the document that I have shared here? Scroll down. If you see, you could have done it in this way, correct? Wherein after every activity, added a fail activity on failure, send an email notification. But there, what you all are doing is you are actually duplicating the number of activities that are present, and there's a limitation of 80 activity per pipeline. Correct. Scroll down. So this is ideally not the apt way to do that. Hence, scroll down. Scroll down more. There is, you would get a main framework. Scroll down. I'll tell you when to stop. This one. If you see, what I've done is, in this framework, what we do is, basically you are trying to capture the error messages of all in a single activity. What this does, we have used the dependence aspect, the combination of that. If act 1 is completed, meaning it's either success or failure. If act 2 is skipped or completed, meaning irrespective of whether an activity has failed or succeeded, what I do is I'm trying to capture the error message aspect. If you remember the null error, how to capture the error message of activity? So we are trying to concatenate all the values in a single framework. And in case if that variable has any value, meaning there is an error present. But if it is a null only, meaning there have been no errors and it is success. So in this way, rather than capturing the error message per activity per email notification, we can capture the error messages of any activity via single framework, thereby avoiding duplication of activities or duplication of logics and simplifying the framework. So would request you all to go through this link and we can discuss this in detail in case if there is any confusion on this. This block pretty much covers detailed aspect of what this framework is trying to do and the scenarios of try, catch, error, etc. So any queries?
No, Nandan. No, Nandan, here we need to do like set variable one set variable. There are two variables, right? We need to
You can take a look with respect to the JSON that is present in that GitHub location.
okay.
Correct, but this is an Azure Data Factory JSON. Correct. Yeah, but you can understand going across the JSON how this works across.
Okay.
Clear? So any queries?
So Nandan, like instead of using like increment variable, okay. So I just find a solution to there is a range function, okay. So that I just did and it it works, okay. So
Sorry,
was it
your voice is not clear. Can you be more clear?
hello?
Yes,
Can you hear me now?
yes.
So the variable increment variable here we used, okay. So instead of using increment variable, okay, to count the repetitions, okay. So I had used like range function, okay, that I found, and so
It depends.
was
See,
it?
the case of range function is you create a range, correct? But for that
Uh,
corresponding iteration, correct?
uh,
Imagine if that scenario changes, correct?
uh,
Let me take a look with respect to that case study in detail, correct? With your
okay,
case study, and then I'll get back on that.
okay,
Range function is to create an array based on your start range and your end range, correct? But here, since you do not know, correct, your parameter can change based on the value, correct? As of now, it contained only 5 values, but parameter, it's a parameter. Any user can pass any set of values, correct? So I need to take a look with respect to the dynamic aspect of that.
yeah,
So I'll
okay,
get back
please,
by tomorrow on that,
okay, okay.
specific to your case study. So team, any queries up till whatever case study or the data flow or the medallion architecture that we discussed?